And these things are probably all mixed up and everything because that's the way the battle was. It was mixed up, and a lot of times I'll remember something that happened to me, and then I'll forget about it, and then later I'll remember something that happened. But I remember as I was crawling along out there, just without any direction, just crawling back and forth, I remember Emil Kettle Hut had rolled over onto the top of a rice dike, and about that time I saw his hand, he got shot through the hand, and he hollered pretty good. And then about that time I saw him get shot in the eye and took his eye out, and I thought, well, he's gone. But he made it. He got into the hospital with us, and he lost his eye, but he's fine. And I remember Sheridan was crawling along, and all of a sudden he hollered, and I looked over at him, and his helmet was just flipping straight up into the air like in slow motion, and I thought, well, he's dead. And he was in my squad, and he was a good guy, and I mean, one of my best friends. But it didn't do anything to him. Gave him a tremendous headache. It just hit his helmet and knocked it straight up in the air, and nothing went into his head. And so he made it out of there okay. And several other guys, I saw get wounded, and I can't remember some of them as who it was or whatever. But I know that at the end of the day, there were 35 wounded and 19 dead out of 2 platoons of men, and it was a terrible battle. So many people were in that graveyard, laying there. Some of them unconscious, some of them hurting bad, and I was hurting pretty bad. But my wounds really were superficial comparatively. But I had like I said, I had a tremendous concussion, and so they evacuated us out. They put us on a Marine evacuation helicopter, one of those banana-looking helicopters, and I remember we took off, and all of a sudden the chopper took a bunch of hits. They just stitched the chopper with AK-47s, and all these holes just opened up in the chopper, and miraculously nobody got hit, and the chopper set back down real hard on the ground. And then, it really revved its engines up, and it took off. And boy, we went straight up then and got out of there and headed over to the field hospital in Da Nang. But I remember Jim Brewer, as he was crawling, before Wendover called him and asked him who was behind him, and he told him that he was wounded, and he had been shot in the top of the shoulder, and the bullet had split and went on both sides of his heart, where they're still there today. And it was a real serious wound. He spent several months in the hospital, and they were never able to get the bullets out of his chest. My actually probably best friend I had in Vietnam was a guy named James Lopp. We called him Jimmy. He hitchhiked to Yoakum to my home with me on many weekends. We would hitchhike from Fort Hood to Yoakum, and I had a girlfriend back there in Yoakum, and so he'd go home with me, and we'd go to the movies and just kind of hang out. And when we were getting hit the hardest, I remember that he and Martachi, the machine gunner, and he was Martachi's assistant machine gunner, they were over in these little bushes to our right, and they were doing a lot of heavy firing and everything. And Martachi told me later that he saw the North Vietnamese firing rockets at 2 or 3 of us that were out there, and he kept holding them off with his machine gun. Well, when we got back into the graveyard, right before we got evacuated, Sergeant Bartley came into the graveyard, and he came straight over to me and he said, "Don Lopp's been killed." And it broke my heart. It just really broke my heart. He was such a good guy. He stuttered a lot. He was a smart guy. I remember he and I had hitchhiked home one weekend, and we were hitchhiking through Luling, Texas, and these girls kept riding past us And finally they turned around and stopped, and Lopp ended up writing one of the girls that had stopped and talked to us, and I had to write her and tell her that he had been killed, and I really got a really emotional but heartfelt letter back from her, and it just was a sickening situation. Lopp was a wonderful kid. When I don't remember much about landing at Da Nang. I just remember I was what you call walking wounded, ambulatory, and I remember that I helped somebody off the chopper, and I was helping them hop into the little. It was a pretty big tent hospital, just a station, and they had all of these bunks in there, and every one of them were full. And I remember I helped somebody in, and the corpsman grabbed the person I was helping. I don't even remember who it is now. I was just too far out of it. And they grabbed him and put him on a gurney, a little jungle cot there, and put an IV in him. And they just kind of forgot about me. And I remember standing there leaning against his tent pole, and I think the full impact of what happened hit me. It impacted me. I mean, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I remember I started just to cry. And I was missing Lopp, and about that time this doctor looked up and he saw me standing there squalling, and I was just leaning against his tent post, and of course I was bloody from head to toe. And I remember him saying, "Somebody grab that man." Of course he deleted expletives, and I don't remember anything else until I got out to the hospital ship, but somebody grabbed me and put me down and put an IV in me. Sometime late that afternoon, we were put on a helicopter and taken out to the USS Sanctuary hospital ship off the coast of Dong Ha, which is north of Da Nang. And I remember waking up, getting off the chopper, and they put us in this little, like a hallway they called triage, and I remember thinking I was in pretty bad shape. I felt, I was exhausted. We hadn't had any sleep in 2 nights, and just totally exhausted. I'd crawled through 400 meters of sloppy rice paddy with all my equipment on, and pulling a wounded man, and all of a sudden another chopper came in behind us, and I was laying on a little pallet on the floor in this triage section, and it was a chopper full of Marines from Khe Sanh, and they had been under siege for, like I said before, for a couple of months. The guys' clothes were rotting off of them. They were so wounded, it was horrible. So one kid came in, and his eyeballs looked like grape jelly, just stuck in the sockets of his head. Looked like they just blobbed jelly in his eyes, and it was his eyeballs. And one kid came in, and both of his legs and both of his arms were broken and shot up. One guy he must have had 500 little holes all in him. He was still alive, had several of his fingers missing, and next thing you knew, I was sitting up on the cot, and then pretty soon I was sitting up smoking a cigarette and thinking, I'm not bad at all. These poor guys from Khe Sanh, they were mangled. It's unbelievable. I don't even know how to describe it. The feeling that I had laying there, knowing I was hurt, but knowing I was blessed so much. And it was really a sad day. A couple of days after I got on the hospital ship, none of the shrapnel that I had went through my skull and entered my brain. I was very lucky. I have a piece right in the center of my forehead, which is a sliver of that bullet. But I had a horn on the front of my head about that long. It just made a perfect little cone, and they couldn't figure out why it lasted so long. So I was on the ship almost a month before that went down. But one day, a couple of days after I got hit, the doctor decided he needed to take some shrapnel out of this part of my head, but so they didn't have hardly any supplies left on the ship because Khe Sanh was just draining them. So he gave me one shot of Novocaine, then he cut me open. And immediately the blood just gushed out. Well, that washed most of that Novocaine out, so he just kept cutting. And he was trying to, and he did dig one piece of shrapnel out, but I have several pieces bedded under a network of nerves that goes across your forehead here. And by that time, all the deadening had washed out of my head, and he just didn't have any more that they could spare for something like that. So he told me, he said, I'm going to have to sew you back up. He said, I can't operate on you. You're too tense. And I was tearing the sheets off that bed and off that little operation table. And so he put, I think, 10 stitches in my head without a lick of deadening. And I don't want that to ever happen again. And he sewed me back up. But I still have trouble with that. I can just tap my head right here, and it shoots pains all down through my jaw and sometimes down to my hand right here. And it'll give me a headache if I tap on it a few times. And it's just real tender. It feels strange. You know, the A Company, First of the Sixth, the original Gunfighters, probably one of the best bunch of guys I've ever known in my life. They came from all over the United States. Madison was from California, and Metz was from New Jersey. Several guys from New York, from Wyoming, from Wisconsin, from Texas, Louisiana, from all over the United States. And yet it's amazing how we all fit together, different yet so much alike. And to this day, 2007, we still meet, and we still have so much in common. And like the movie says, we're truly a band of brothers. And, you know, we've bled together. I remember at one point, most of us had dysentery, and we had to kind of tend to each other, and it was nothing but a mess. It's horrible. We got in fights with each other in base camps and even sometimes in the field, but yet we would die for each other. We were willing that day to, we'd made up our mind we were going to stay with the wounded man and die with him, because we were getting overrun and we just weren't going to leave him to die by himself. And I'm not saying that like, hey, we're heroes. I'm saying that because we loved each other and we cared about each other. And that's what family does, and that's what we were. We were the Gunfighter A Company family. And Captain Brennan was like our dad. And our squad leaders were like our big uncles. And it was amazing. And like I said, we get together still once a year, and all of our wives come and they get together. They fit together just like family. It's really a unique company. I feel like different than any company, and we seem to have a closeness that the other companies didn't have. Therefore, they called on us to do things a lot of times instead of the other companies.